Loud. And we are live? Yeah, here, or not live, we're recording. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. My guest this evening is a fellow who I've known on Facebook and Instagram for a little while, and we had a gig thing a couple years ago. He's a pretty accomplished player, has several albums out, a very successful duo, and an adorable son who he posts pictures of on Instagram all the time. Rupert Boyd, thank you for joining me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So, how are you? How's everything going with the quarantine? How's life?
Well, it's certainly been a very strange time.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm well, my family is well. We have a roof over our heads, can't complain in that way. But just thinking today is day, I think, 71 that we
Mm.
literally haven't done sort of anything.
Are you
Um,
are you guys in the city?
we're in Manhattan, we're in
Okay.
Washington Heights.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I mean, it sort of definitely makes a big change from I mean, it's a big change for everybody, but for us, we're sort of always on the road, traveling around a lot. We hosted a Sunday morning concert series, and now suddenly it's like barely leave the apartment every day.
Absolutely nothing. It goes from whatever you want it to be to absolutely nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Um,
feel very fortunate. We have our health,
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and that's sort of the main thing. And yeah, and I guess also you mentioned our son that he's been great company. I think he was really loving having both parents at home all the time.
Yeah.
He's never experienced that in his 2 years of life. So he's loving having us around. And for us, it's both a blessing and I guess another way of putting it is that 10 years ago, I think having a month off would have been kind of not too shabby. Would have done a lot of guitar practice, read all those books that are on my bookshelf, which I've been wanting to read. Uh, caught up with emails, family. But with a 2 year old, someone needs to be looking after him like all the time.
Hmm.
And so my wife and we've barely practiced. We certainly haven't done much rehearsing together. I've read a book and a half in 72 days.
I think it's I being my son is 10 months and he just his latest thing is like the whole cruising thing. So if there's adjoining furniture, he can go as far as that highway takes him. And you're right, like if he's not doing that, he's flying across the house, crawling. And you're right, somebody needs to be on top of that child all the time because all it takes is one. Like he starts slapping my guitar,
Right.
and as you have a similar style guitar where the tops of them are extremely thin, and I'm like, please don't bang on the guitar.
Right.
So, but yeah, no, I agree. It's cool too because my wife and I are both school teachers, and so the idea of just being home now is really something that I'm trying to be grateful for and try to just appreciate as long as it happens because this is a precious time. But I invited you on because you have so you represent a couple really different things, really great things to me and to the podcast. The first is that you are, I believe, the first or second person on this podcast who's not from the University of Hartford, but you're from another big school in Connecticut, or at least you were there for a while, right? We're going to talk about your full education history, but you did go to Yale for a while and studied with Ben Verdery.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good 10 years ago. No,
Yeah.
12 years ago. I can't even remember now. I graduated in 2008. So yeah, 12 years ago.
Let's
Pretty much
let's work.
to the day, right?
What's that?
To the day. It's probably, March 21st,
Oh yeah.
2008 that I graduated. Yeah.
Let's work our way up to that. You do quite a bit with guitar now, and we kind of covered what you would be doing if we weren't in lockdown, if we weren't in this quarantine. But let's talk about how you got to this point. So, wherever you'd like to start. I mean, was classical guitar always a part of your life, or did you kind of come to it like many of us do through contemporary music?
I actually did start off on classical guitar.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and I feel sort of really fortunate that when I was what 6 or 7, I was doing just a general music program through my local elementary school. And so in those classes, we didn't learn to play the recorder or ukulele or any instruments. We just learned to how to read music and clap and sing.
Yeah.
And then one day they asked if I wanted to play an instrument. And I'm pretty sure they asked everybody in the class, but they sent us home to ask, talk to our parents to see if we wanted to play an instrument.
Just you. The
And
rest of them were trash. Just you.
so I am pretty sure everybody was asked this question. But then I remember I got home and my brother came home from school, and this is 30 years ago, so maybe it's a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure that exact same day my brother came home from school playing a guitar. And so he had learned at high school how to play, I think, green sleeves or something. So he was sitting
Mhm.
there on, our front porch, plucking away green sleeves. And I thought, yeah, the guitar is obviously the best instrument. And ran back to school the next day to say, yeah, I really want to play guitar.
And this is back
Um,
home in Jamaica, where you're from.
Jamaica, Queens, yes. No, not Jamaica, Queens, not Jamaica in the Caribbean, but I grew up in Australia, literally 10,000 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah, you might hear I sound a little funny, and it's not that I have a cold. It's actually I
It's
have an
not.
accent.
It's not the COVID.
It's not the COVID. No, it's just an accent.
Where in Australia did you grow up?
So I grew up in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia.
Hmm.
It was like a really good place to grow up. As I classically say, and my parents get mad at, it was a great place to leave as
Right.
well. But it's 300,000 people. My parents are still there. My brother has moved to New Zealand, and my sister's in Melbourne. But it was 300,000 people, which it's big enough that it's not tiny, but it's a smallish town. So you could drive anywhere in the city in 10 to 15 minutes. My local elementary and high school were both like a 5 to 10 minute walk away.
Mm.
So sort of that sort of quality of living was really great.
Was it more? You said town, so I'm picturing, you know, suburbia mixed with a little bit of rural. Because
Yeah,
you live in, I'm thinking you live in New York City now, which probably initially was a big change, but I'm trying to think of what was the landscape like there.
well, the interesting thing about Canberra is that it is the capital of Australia, but 100 years ago it didn't even really exist. That Australia became a federation in 1901, and they couldn't decide whether Sydney or Melbourne should be the capital. And so they just picked a town right in the middle. And at the time, it was just like a farming community. They brought in an American architect called Walter Burley Griffin and designed a really quite beautiful city. They made an artificial lake. It's very sort of well planned out. And in some ways, sort of reminds me a bit of DC in
Mm.
that way, that it's
Okay.
all the avenues are very sort of beautifully lined out, beautiful vistas wherever you go. But then it is kind of rural. It's a 3 hour drive to Sydney and a 7 hour drive to Melbourne. But from my parents who live pretty much as close to the center of town as you can get, you could walk for 10 minutes and you can be on the side of a hill with kangaroos bouncing around.
Mm.
And I'm not making that up for your American audience. That like legitimately kangaroos would sleep on my high school oval, the high school lawn.
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
walking to
I'd love to
school,
see
yeah.
that someday.
Yeah, and so it really had this sort of nice mix of, it's not a huge city, but it definitely is a city, but also having this beautiful like parklands and sort of natural areas.
That's wonderful. Maybe someday when the world opens back up. So so it sounds like you had a pretty good elementary education of music. You picked up the guitar, and you said you started off with classical. So what was that experience like in those early years of playing the guitar?
Yeah, well, so I was 8 years old, and I probably wasn't necessarily like the brightest kid, the sharpest tool in the shed, because when they asked if I wanted to play guitar, they kept asking, "Do you want to play classical guitar?" And I didn't even know what the difference between classical and rock and roll was. All
Okay.
I knew is that I really liked what my brother was doing and wanted to play the guitar. He actually gave up like 2 weeks later. So it
Wow.
wasn't as though I was sort of following his footsteps for much more than a couple of weeks. But yeah, so my very first teacher taught me on a classical guitar, And I don't remember so well, but I'm pretty sure I started growing fingernails like within a year. And I because I remember the first like 5 minutes of every lesson being my teacher filing my fingernails for me.
As a
Um,
child,
and
that's
yeah,
impressive.
yeah, and maybe maybe it was 2 or 3 years after playing, but I
Hmm.
from some of my very first memories of my guitar lessons were my fingernails being filed for me at the start of every lesson. And and for kids that age, we didn't do one lesson a week. We had 2 half-hour lessons a week, which really was, I mean, looking back on it, incredible.
This is
So
through
and
the
also,
school.
so it was through my elementary school, but actually at the local university.
Okay.
Yeah, so and it was just a 5 minute drive away or so. But I have to thank my mum who twice a week drove me for these half-hour guitar lessons.
That's wonderful. Did you continue with it through your well, how, were you in Australia for all of your education before um
Yeah,
your
yeah. So actually, you asked though how like interested I was in the guitar. I remember when I was 8, like I did enjoy it, but I don't think I ever practiced. I remember maybe like a big day I'd do like 10 minutes of practice.
wow.
But I also, I loved playing cricket and soccer and running around, going down to the lake. And I remember the guitar was something I did, but it was never until maybe like 14 or 15 that I started to really think, the guitar is something that I really want to do. And
Hmm.
that was, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but a lot of that was because of Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
Just remember like listening to these records of Hendrix and even just like some great like blues players like BB King and just really being like, wow, you can do that on the guitar.
What was
And
it? let- Let's talk about Hendrix for a second because it's funny. A lot of people that I've talked to doing these episodes have talked in great detail about Jimi Hendrix. Um, I mean, what was that first experience like?
um, I think to me it was just this sort of excitement that you could do so much more than you can with the classical guitar. And I should like skip ahead maybe a year. Like for about a year or so, I was just wanting to play Hendrix and blues and rock and roll. And then suddenly, though, one day just had this revelation that with the classical guitar, you can really sit down and just you don't need to plug it in. And you can just sit there with yourself and create something. You don't need a drummer or a bass player. You really
Hmm.
can create this incredibly full, almost orchestral sound at times and sort of
Absolutely.
loved that. Yeah, and I loved just that very tactile sensation of like the fingernails on the strings without having to worry about leads and amplifiers, and so that all sort of happened a year later. But for me, the Hendrix aspect of it was just just this sheer sort of like coolness of sound coming out of the speakers, and both his playing, but also what they were doing in the studio, and the
Yeah.
backwards guitars and all that sort of stuff. Just was really exhilarating.
It's something that's really amazing about Hendrix, and you don't notice this unless you are a guitar player and you try to play Hendrix, is that his lead playing, what you can think whatever you want about it, but his rhythm playing is something really special. If Little Wing is probably the best example for a non-guitar player to listen to, but something like Spanish Castle Magic or Crosstown Traffic or Castles Made of Sand, there's just all this really wonderful stuff, both guitar wise and musicianship wise, right? Like
Mm.
his guitar sounds amazing. That clean sound on that tubey neck pickup, that's unbelievable. And then the things that he's doing, the chords that he's playing, you look at it and you realize, oh, he had to use his thumb to grab those bass notes. And then your teacher probably tells you not to do it, like mine did. But there's no other way to play it authentically. Like, if you want to play it like Hendrix, you got to use that thumb.
Sure. Well, and for me, I didn't get an electric guitar for years. So I was like trying to play all these things, and just on the classical guitar, just the thumb, especially with 13-year-old hands, you just
Yeah.
can't quite make those reaches go. But I agree with you 100% that more than just being like a really virtuosic guitar player, I think Hendrix was just a great musician, and
Yeah.
just had just these really like the opening to Castles Made of Sand. It's just such beautiful guitar playing.
It's really hard if for anybody that says, "Oh, electric guitar, so and so, whatever." It, if you try to play that, you're going to fall, unless you really know what you're doing and really work on it, you're going to be missing something because like you're right, those moments are really special.
Mm.
Um, so you continued.
There's an example that I love, and it's like literally like 3 seconds. That I
What's
think
that?
is some of the greatest guitar playing ever. So it's from a live concert, live in Monterey, and you can find it all over YouTube. But he plays Bob Dylan's "Like a Rolling Stone," and at the beginning he's just sort of playing the chords and introducing the song, and then he stops and says, "Excuse me, let me get my guitar straight," and just plays like 4 seconds of this guitar solo that's obviously like bubbling up inside of him, and it's just this incredible beauty that I think for Hendrix, he wasn't sort of necessarily sort of thinking about these things. These things were just kind of like bubbling up the whole time,
Mm,
and I think often
I wrote
people,
that down.
yeah, it's definitely it's worth
Thank
checking
you.
out. And like the whole song is like 8 minutes long, and
Yeah.
it's not great. Like don't once you get past that first like 45 seconds or so, you can switch on to something else. But
Yeah.
just not find that moment, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will absolutely check that out. Thank you.
Mm.
Um, so it sounds like even though as a guitar player, Hendrix didn't change your ultimate course, your ultimate trajectory, but it sounds like what he did for you was really light a fire in you that you ultimately that ultimately led you in the a direction that you had already been going, but Hendrix did something really important to you. What was that like? You mentioned flash forward, the guitar is now a really serious thing for you. Let's talk about how you got there to how you got, because I know all I know about you at Yale was your master's, right?
Actually, I did the artist diploma.
The artist diploma. Okay, so let's talk about everything up to there, because I don't even know where you went to undergrad.
Sure. Um, yeah, so like exactly as you said, Hendrix, I feel like he really opened my ears to music in general. And sort of through that, sort of loved playing just all the classical guitar repertoire and loved sort of listening to Bach and Beethoven and pretty much anything I could get my hands on, which, this is the 90s. I'm not talking like that long ago,
Right.
but I still remember having to like go through my parents' LP collection to find music and even borrowing CDs from the library, wasn't able to just stream anything instantly. So I think, kids have it lucky these days, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I
The
mean,
internet made the world very small very quickly, very
yeah,
quickly.
and just to be able to, and I love this every day. You think of a song, and within seconds, you can pull it up on your phone and stream it through your sound system. It's incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of my sort of education, I did love guitar at the end of high school, but in Australia, you go into the beginning of so I did my undergraduate degree in Australia at the Australian National University,
Hmm.
and there you specialize from like day one of your bachelor's. There's not really that much of a like a liberal arts degree. So some of my friends went off and studied medicine straight after high school, and some went off to do law. I was really interested in both science and music, and I remember at that end of year 12, really thinking, do I want to go off in astronomy and astrophysics were really a huge passion of mine. But then for some reason, the guitar won. And I really had to make that decision when I was, I guess, 17 or maybe 18 years old.
Mm.
And in many ways, it was because of the great guitar teacher in Australia, a guy named Timothy Kane. And some of your listeners might know him. He recorded an album with John Williams a number of years ago called The Mantis and the Moon.
And they did the micro pieces, the Brower micro
They did
pieces,
the Brower on that album. Yeah.
which was the only recording of it we could find. Me and my duo partner when we played it for Brower. And I'll tell you that story later because Brower is one of my favorite people.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, 'cause, me too. Every one of my albums has a Brower piece on it. But yeah, so Tim Kane was an incredible teacher, and I actually started with him in year 11 in the 11th
Okay.
grade. So I had these sort of 2 years at the end of high school studying with him. Um, and just such an incredible teacher, incredible musician, just also a really lovely person who I feel very lucky to consider him a close friend. Every time I'm back in Australia, go out and catch up over a few beers.
Mm.
Yeah, so a really great person, and I think just his enthusiasm for the instrument really helped me make that decision. So yeah, so I did a 4 year Bachelor of Music degree with him, and then really felt like I wanted to continue studying, but also felt like I'd been studying with Tim for 6 years
Hmm.
at that stage, so 2 years of high school and 4 years of bachelor. Um, and so I was thinking like what to do. I'd never left Australia. I was still actually living with my parents because in the same town, um, and thought about studying overseas. And so that's when I guess I thought about sort of studying in the UK or even in France or Spain, but it settled upon New York City, and for two reasons. One, I'd found out about David Leisner
Mm.
and sort of read some of his stuff about like his technique using the large muscles,
Hmm.
and there was that, and there was also just New York City in general that I had so many of my idols, like Jimi Hendrix, made his fame and fortune in Greenwich Village, and Bob Dylan moved here when he was 17, and even Stanley Kubrick, all these people, John Lennon, all these people that I just thought were gods, I knew had all lived in New York City. I was like, I need to go and check this place out. Um, so I did actually a video audition, an old VHS cassette tape in those days, sent that off, and got accepted into the Manhattan School of Music. And then a few months later, bought a one-way ticket.
Wow.
I'm studying here, and I thought I would be here for 1 year of the master's degree, hoping that I'd be able to find the finances to do a second year. And now we're talking 16 years later. I'm still here.
So you found some way to pay rent, and that's mostly Chipotle delivery, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's don't even get me started on those jokes. Yeah.
What so there's so much there that's really really wonderful. First of all, just the idea that you got to study with such an incredible teacher in Australia, and then make such a shift, not only as a young musician but a young person. That's hard to do. That's a scary thing to do. And you sort of answered my question. I was going to ask you why New York. I mean, even so, this was, we're talking early 2000s, right?
This is 2004.
Okay, so even then, there was probably still some really strong schools for classical guitar, especially on the West Coast. But you answered my question. I was going to say, why New York? So you get to New York and you start studying. And did you study with him at first?
Yeah. So I came and studied with David Leisner. And yeah, so looking back on it, I'm 38 years old now. Looking back on being a 22-year-old kid, and literally, I had a suitcase and a guitar with me, and I didn't know a single person in North America.
Right.
And I remember, like, I arrived off the plane, and I'd never left Australia at this point. I remember just sort of walking around. I was, went to Times Square because that's all I kind of really knew about New York
Hmm.
City. Went there and sort of walking around thinking, I literally don't know a single person here. And in some ways, that was also really exciting. And I knew I had accommodation at the school, and everything was sort of fine. I didn't have to instantly find a job and anything like that. But I don't know. I don't. I mean, I definitely wouldn't and couldn't do sort of a complete life transition like that in this day and age.
that's the thing that I was just thinking is that, you know, you're right. You had all your ducks in a row, so to speak, but at the same time, you don't know, if it's going to ultimately work out. And like now, you're right. Like I'm 32, and I'm thinking I couldn't do that. When you're 22, when you're in your early 20s, you kind of have the guts to do something pretty crazy like that. And
Mm,
in the big picture, it's not a tremendous risk, right? Because you can always go back home. But
sure.
you're right. It's pretty profound. And then especially to follow an instructor who is a killer player, is a great teacher, but you've never met, right? You don't have that relationship. You have 6 years of safety somewhere
Mm,
else, and you don't know what that's going to be like. But I think that's wonderful. I was actually just watching him play uh, Villalobos Etude today, watching what his left hand was doing. Etude 7. He's so
mhm.
good.
Yeah, and actually, that was one of the ways I found out about David Leisner is from he did the first recording of the manuscripts of
Mm,
the Lobos studies.
wow.
I think I even just sort of randomly came across that CD in a record store,
Yeah.
and that's how I first sort of heard of his name. But I was a huge Villa-Lobos fan. I wrote a thesis on Villa-Lobos for my
Okay.
undergraduate degree. Yeah, and so that was how I came across him.
So this is one of my favorite questions to ask. What was the, and I think this is going to be a less of a profound answer from you because you've had such great guitar teachers along the way. But I like to ask people, what was the difference between the education you got as an undergraduate, then going to a conservatory? But it sounds like you had a very high caliber of education with your first guitar teacher. So could you talk a little bit about kind of the fundamentals, the basic principles of these first two guitar teachers, and then we'll get to Yale?
Sure. Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was at the Australian National University, but at their School of Music. So it was kind of a conservatory style teaching, but still we could do like one or two subjects anywhere within the university. So kind of that best of both worlds aspect. But in terms of Tim Kaine's teaching, it's he really is like one of the world's best guitar teachers. It's really incredible. Just there's this sort of long stream of guitarists who have studied with him, who've
Mm.
gone on to have sort of really great careers. People you may have heard of like Alexander Cebulski,
Mm-hmm.
Andrei Lebedev's doing great things, Stephanie Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have a guitar duo with Jacob Cordova, who's in Barcelona.
Oh,
So
sure,
there's
sure.
sort of just, many other people are just there, just a few names, Harold Gretton, just a few names that sort of come straight to mind. And so I've always wondered, like, what was his special skill? What was his ability to do so well with students? Um, and in many ways, just he's a great musician, and I think he could always impart upon his students both a love of music, but also just an enthusiasm to really get to the bottom of a piece and be able to play a piece really well.
And what in your interpretation of your experience with him, what did that revolve around? I mean, that's a huge question, but
Sure.
how do you get to the bottom of a piece when you're in that stage of your life with that teacher?
Um, Partly, I think it always takes time. I know that's kind of avoiding the question a little bit, but
No.
but especially especially if you're playing like a Bach piece or anything that's more complex than a beginning piece. It's you can't expect to like learn it and sort of really understand it in a couple of days or even a week or two.
Mm.
Um, and I love and this is a whole other conversation, but this quarantine period has given us all, I think, a moment of repose, for want of a much better word. But suddenly it's like I don't have to play a concert next week. Like I don't even know when the next time I'm going to play a concert is. So what do I need to practice? I
Right.
don't have to have this piece ready for that performance. Like all these concerts in the past few months, in February and early March, I was working every single moment I could get to playing some like really challenging pieces and just a lot of rep under the fingers, and then suddenly just all stopped.
Right.
And
You
it
get
took
the
me,
opportunity to go a little bit deeper or to shift gears completely.
yeah, and it suddenly like there's no pressing need to practice literally anything. So I've been sort of playing a bunch of pieces, even just like really loving this piece by Kapsberger,
Mm.
who he wrote it for Theorbo in like 1604. It's this incredibly old piece, so around about the time of Dowland,
Hmm.
um, and just playing it. And sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but been playing it for the past couple of weeks. I just put up a video of it on Facebook. If anybody's interested to see me play it, it goes for like 2 minutes long. So for 2 minutes, you can live back in the early 17th century. But I find whenever I'm learning any piece that I can play through it a lot, and you still can always get better at it. Like I've never played a piece and felt like, wow, I've mastered that piece.
Hmm.
I'm always finding, and this is not just in terms of like hitting all the notes. It's much
Right.
beyond sort of just the pure technique. That it's you can see these sort of connections between certain elements. I mean, especially if we're talking Bach. That and that's some of the other repertoire I've been coming back to is playing Bach preludes
Yeah.
and these motives that just continue throughout the piece, like his 997 prelude.
Mm.
Just there's so much to that piece. It's 4 minutes long, but I feel like you could spend an entire life and still be sort of enjoying getting better at playing it.
That fugue is a nightmare.
And that fugue is a nightmare. I think Bach fugues in general are a nightmare. But
Yeah.
yeah, that one is a definite challenge.
What? So how did that compare? What were the teaching strategies, or maybe a philosophy or a pedagogical, however you want to put it, between your study there and then when you get to New York?
Um, well, so for anyone who doesn't know about David Leisner, he has a very interesting story to tell. And he developed what's called focal dystonia, where he lost the use of his A and his ring finger in his right hand, and a somewhat compromised use of his M finger. And it would happen sort of involuntarily when he was playing. And feel very fortunate. I would, very lightly knock on wood here, but I feel fortunate. I never had focal dystonia, never had any like really serious issues, but I've always sought more sort of relaxation, more freedom in my playing. And so that was a big sort of motivation in wanting to study with David Leisner. And so I did spend quite a lot of time in sort of, trying to assimilate from him his technique and his thoughts upon just, one's general sort of use, how one uses one body, like much more than just like how you're using your finger joints, but like
Sure.
how are you using your shoulders, how are you breathing, how are your feet on the floor, things like that. So I spent, I guess, a lot of time I was posing questions like that to David and trying to get those from him. Um, but then also like I think also partly with Tim, like especially in the last 2 years of high school and early years of the undergraduate degree, we did spend a good amount of time on sort of on the technique of the finger and the fingernail touching the string. That kind of very rudiments of a solid fundamental technique,
Mm.
which by the time I got to my master's, I was open to discussing those with David, but I don't feel like I didn't need them as much as I did 4 or 5 or 6 years earlier.
Sure.
So that
Sure.
was,
Sure.
I guess, that was a big difference. Yeah.
What was the kind of rep that you were playing in New York um, when you started? Actually, I didn't even ask you what you played in your undergrad. Do you remember what your recitals consisted of in when you were finishing your undergrad?
Yeah. So,
Was a
so I
lot
guess
of
actually,
the staples of the repertoire, or did you seek to do other things?
no, I still do. I do play a lot of. I try to avoid like the really famous pieces, but I do play the pretty standard repertoire. I'm not playing that much really out there repertoire. But partly Tim Kaine was always very adamant that we would play some Australian repertoire.
Mm,
And I feel really fortunate for that because really some of the best music being written for guitar is been written in the past 30 years by Australian composers.
sure.
I have a whole guitar duo, which we can talk about, which we
Mm,
do focus on the Australian repertoire. But one thing in my undergraduate degree, we had to do recitals every year. Of like every year they got a little bit longer, but in our fourth year, we were having 2 1-hour lessons a week.
oh wow.
And in the first semester, we had to play a concerto, for which I played the Rodrigo Aranjuez, just with piano, unfortunately. But we had to
The,
play
the
that
entire the entire thing.
the entire thing,
Wow.
and like it was about a I think 30 to 40 minute recital. So
Wow.
that was the end of the first semester, and then the end of the year, we had to play a 60-minute recital without repeating any of the repertoire. So it was,
Yikes.
yeah, and that was a really difficult year. Like
Yeah.
just difficult. It was great, but like I remember just I could never really take a weekend off from practicing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty much the story of my life. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it was always working hard, and even well, especially having those 2 lessons a week. Couldn't just go in twice a week and play the same piece, not having done
Mm.
any practice. I was having to do like probably 4 or 5 hours every day. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So in that fourth year, I did the Rodrigo Concerto, and then some Australian repertoire like Philip Houghton, I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure, and
Which
Granada.
Houghton did you play?
I was doing. I must have been God of the Northern Forest.
Hmm.
Yeah, because that's been a favorite of mine for many
It's a
years.
wonderful piece.
And then I remember in my graduation recital, I did Valses Poeticos by
Mm.
Granados, and I think Bach's Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm probably some like some Schubert and some other
Yeah.
things like some Giuliani. Yeah, things like that. A mixed bag, but probably most things you would heard of.
Yeah, yeah. Which there, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, not knocking that you have to learn. They're a standard for a good reason, right?
Right.
It's not like we're talking about Lagrima but Lagrima is great too. You know, there's nothing wrong with that piece.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I mean that's all the classics. Like even the other day, I picked up Spanish Dance Number Five,
mhm,
King Ardos, and it's a piece I haven't played that since I was like 15
yeah,
or so. But there is a reason why audiences love it. It's a great piece.
yeah.
But then also playing this Kapsberger piece. I'm like, this is a piece that I'm sure some people know it, but definitely people in the early music scene would know it. But I feel like most guitarists probably haven't heard it, and just sitting there playing it every day, thinking this is just magical. It's such a
There's
cool
something
piece.
special about that period of time too, because there's so many composers that are overshadowed by the gigantic uh, legacy. I don't know what you want to call it of Bach, right? Even though those composers didn't always exist at the same exact time as Bach, Bach has this wide shadow that kind of says, "Oh, Baroque. Well, it's this." Even
Right.
though you know Bach doesn't always
Yeah,
his dates
hundred
don't always
percent.
line up with those Baroque ideals.
100% agree, and except these pieces, and I thought about sort of these pieces though. This Katzberger piece was a good 100 years earlier than Bach,
Right.
and keep thinking like it's over 400 years ago, and I really love just thinking about here is someone, especially when it is something like just a solo lute piece or
Hmm.
solo theorbo piece, that 400 years ago, Katzberger would have sat down and played this. And now, 400 years later, I know practically nothing about this guy, but I can still pick up this piece and presumably feel the same emotions he felt. Like you can feel when he's happy and when he's sad and all these things. And it's just this sort of direct line to someone who lived in a time that, if he came to 2020, it would be like shocking. People
Right.
driving around in cars and using mobile phones and flying around the world, he would lose his mind. Yeah, yeah,
And
but
you're shining a light on him when so much of that light is going to the usual suspects. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but in order to go seek out somebody a little bit different, I think that's really special. So what was the rep like when you came to New York and studied with David Leisner?
with David, it was actually a lot of like the similar-ish repertoire. When I was at Manhattan School of Music, I won the concerto competition with the Aaron Worth.
Hmm.
So I do feel like a good portion of my 2 years there was practicing Aaron Worth because the concerto competition was in my first year and then gave a performance with the orchestra in my second year. And for anybody who's even dabbled with the piece, it's one that you can't get by in a few days of practice.
No, the
Countless
scales
hours.
are the easy part.
Right. Yeah, and everything else is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I'm sure I spent countless hours practicing that. I can't remember, and I think also coming to the States, I mean, I think you know a good amount of like Philip Houghton's music,
Hmm.
but a lot of people don't know any of these Australian composers. So I loved playing Peter Sculthorpe. Has a piece called From Kakadu. Four
Hmm.
movements is about 12 or 15 minutes long. It's such a beautiful piece, and for me, like very evocative of Australia. But it's one that I mean, people would know John Williams has recorded. It's not sort of obscure in any way, but it's not one that you hear regularly played in the United States.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I did champion a lot of like Philip Houghton, Peter Sculthorpe, Nigel Westlake, these sort of
Hmm.
great Australian composers who are household names in Australia, but kind of much more obscure here.
Sure. I was very fortunate to be at the Hart School. We played a lot of Philip Houghton's music. So even before, because I played Ophelia for my master's recital, and even before that, even before I considered anything, like that, I had been familiar with, Stele, Gothica, what's the flute and guitar from the Dreaming,
Mhm.
like all of this really, like I knew who he was. I knew what kind of music that was. It was beautiful music. And then when I was decided to come around to it, um, I was able to find something that I think fit me pretty well. So So you
You know
do
what?
two.
I would actually let me just interrupt and say I think some of his best repertoire is his guitar duos.
Oh
And
yeah.
anybody who's in a guitar duo out there, he's got three like incredibly different pieces, but they're all brilliant in very different ways.
Remind me of the names of them. It's
Yeah, so one is called three duet or three duets,
okay.
and it's three shortish movements. And it's a great piece. It's very straightforward. It's probably the most accessible for everyone. And in my guitar duo, we recorded that on our album. He's also got one called Brolga, and the Brolga is a native Australian bird, very similar to the stork. So these sort of
Hmm.
very large, kind of lumping animals that he wrote a piece which I can't remember the exact quote, but he's like it's based partly on the bird, the Brolga, and partly on Looney Tunes. So it's this very sort of
Why
wild
not?
piece. Yeah, and it's a kind of it's got some like very sort of tapping moments and crazy up the fretboard moments, but some also just very serene and beautiful moments. We also recorded that on our guitar duo album. And then there's a third piece which we haven't recorded, but other people have, called Wave Radiance.
I think that's the
Where,
one I've heard of.
yeah, and it's very slow, very meditative. It's something like quarter note equals 60 with just regular eighth note chords throughout the piece.
Yeah.
But both guitars just both panning like sound colors from
Yeah.
bright to dark and from quiet to loud.
I,
And yeah, especially if you're sitting there in a room with the two guitars on either side, it's just this incredible phasing piece.
I always felt like the guitars, and I'm very happy with the guitars that I've performed on, but I almost felt like there was never a perfect guitar for his music because he asked so much of those guitars. I think the last note of Ophelia has eight pianos, eight P's next to it. And like obviously that's not, we know that's relative and there's a million ways to interpret that depending on what kind of room you're in, but he understood the guitar and understood the intention of the guitar, right? So it wasn't that he just knew where the notes were and knew how to make cool sounds, but he understood how the guitar was going to help tell the story, whether that story was of a gecko or of somebody losing their mind or of a haunted castle. Like he just understood the guitar really well, and I can't think of too many other people in this generation that understand the guitar. None, but in my limited worldview of music, which is a lot more limited than guitar, right? Like I can't think of another set of music. Well, it actually goes back to Hendrix, right?
Mhm.
Hendrix understood that his guitar so well that he could do things and express things. I think in a very similar way to Philip Houghton.
Well, it's funny, Houghton always said his two big musical influences were J.S. Bach and Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, okay. I
Which
read
is
something
why,
about him really liking Pink Floyd, but
okay.
I'm sure. Yeah,
Well, he's someone, he sadly died, as you would know, but he sadly died, what, 2 or 3 years ago.
yeah.
And he's someone that I'd met him a number of times, and in recent years we'd emailed a little bit, but kind of really wish I'd sort of spent more time with him because he was fascinating. And back to his compositions, he did have an incredible imagination, and also an incredible level of specificity. I hate
Yeah.
that word, but he was just so incredibly particular. Like as you're saying, he would use five Ps to contrast from six Ps in a dynamic
Right.
range. And and I remember actually with our guitar duo, we'd worked on those pieces for years, and we really feel like we got them to a very high level. We recorded them with a great producer in the UK, and the album's like really well edited, everything like it's as good as we feel like we could possibly get it. Sent him a copy to see what his thoughts were, and he came back with like a page of things that he wished we'd done better. And there were things like I'd have a passage where I'd have to stroll, go through all the strings both up and down, sort of very quick arpeggio. And he's like, of those nine notes, the seventh was a tiny bit underplayed.
And if you and like on the surface that's impressive and funny, but the truth is, he walked the walk and could talk the talk, right? Like, I misspoke. He could talk the talk and also walk the walk because if you're going to put those instructions in your music, then you better hope that that person knows what those instructions are. And so that's sort of like um, that's sort of reaffirming that he was such a brilliant person, right? Because if he couldn't hear that that seventh out of the ninth note didn't say what the score was supposed to say, then he has no right to put it in the score.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, I mean, if you look at his scores, they're beautifully, meticulously handwritten. But yeah, you know that every indication that he put in, he really did want. Nothing
Yeah,
was just put in by sort of accident or to make it look good.
yeah. So I know we got a little bit of time left. Can we talk about Yale? Can we move to Yale?
Sure, yeah. So,
So
so
how did you find Ben Verdery, or how did you find the school? Like what was that experience like?
well, I remember I'd played in a masterclass for Ben when I was studying at the Manhattan School of Music. And really, I mean, everybody who knows Ben. He's a very charming, very affable, very hey dudes kind of guy. He's
Hmm.
yeah, full of energy, full of life. So I loved the masterclass. And then I do remember I obviously stayed for both the 2 years of my master's degree at the Manhattan School, but was sort of getting, I think, probably towards the last. Actually, I can't remember where I was, but getting into the second year, thinking, what am I going to do next year? As an international student, I could get a 1 year working visa, so I knew that. But it's really hard as a foreigner to live and work in the United States. Um, and then just but didn't even know like how to get a job. Like I was still very much a college student or doing a master's, but sort of clueless in that entire aspect of the world. And then was sitting down, drinking a cup of coffee, eating a bagel in the cafeteria one morning, read a newspaper article saying that an anonymous donor had given the Yale School of Music $100 million. And so that
Can you say that
tuition,
again, like Doctor Evil from Austin
yeah,
Powers?
exactly,
100.
$100 million. Yeah, and it was incredible. This article just said it's going to be free tuition for every student who gets in.
Mm,
And like that afternoon, I sat down and sent in my application. And super fortunate was got in because it was I think incredibly and competitive that year, and
mm,
I'm sure it's
yeah.
only been even more competitive ever since. But it was incredible to go to Yale on full scholarship because someone very generously gave $100 million. It's
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So I mean, I believe that that person is no longer anonymous, and but I actually don't know who it is. So thank you very much. It was
Mm.
an incredible university, incredible education, yeah, and an incredible chance to spend 2 years studying with Ben. You getting a buzz?
I got a buzz and I fixed the buzz. Look at that.
Perfect.
So, you know, let's. I have so many things to ask you. We'll have to do a part two sometime.
Sure.
What?
And Laura won't mind if we go for like 10 more minutes.
Okay.
I
Awesome.
shouldn't.
Thank
Actually,
you.
we can go for half an hour.
Thank you, Laura. Even though I haven't met you, thank you. What did you learn in Yale at Yale that like could you put your education there, or could you put that experience into a statement or a couple sentences or a story? What did you learn there that really added to your guitar playing and your musicianship and your growth as a person?
There's like two really clear answers to that. One was lessons with Ben Verdery, which were great. And it's funny that he and David Leisner, really good friends. They've known each other forever. They live just 10 blocks away from each other, but they're incredibly different personalities and incredibly different teachers. So going to study with Ben after David and also after Tim Kaine, suddenly I could get from Ben just this really great feeling of I mean, if he's listening, all respect Ben, but I didn't have to take everything he said. I really could get some great ideas, and he's so full of enthusiasm. He has so many different ideas, and walking one day being like, "Man, all those scale passages in the Bach, you have to play them campanella," and we'd sit there and we'd work out how to do it. And then next week I'd
Okay.
come in and I'd play the passage for him in campanella fingering, and he'd be like, "Man, why are you doing that? Just play it as
Yeah.
a scale."
Yeah.
So there'd be some sort of really like bizarre moments, but that kind of enthusiasm and that way of looking at music was great,
Hmm.
and I do really treasure that. That's he's someone who has arranged Jimi Hendrix for the classical guitar,
Hmm.
which he really doesn't mind doing that, or doing anything sort of like out there and different. He doesn't sort of follow the rules. So that was one aspect that was great. The other aspect was I recorded a CD while I was there. Yale has this incredibly beautiful Sprague concert hall, um, and so we could recorded that as a student. And at the time, it was just this incredible bargain of a deal. I can't remember, it was like $50 an hour, $100 an hour to use this beautiful concert hall, a great producer, incredible collection of mics. I remember actually after I graduated, I inquired if I could use the concert hall for another recording, and they wrote back and said it'd be $10,000 a day.
Where's the anonymous donor when you need him?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that so? Was that the Valses Poeticos, the album that you did?
Yes, exactly. And that's Valses Poeticos, which came out, came out actually pretty much the time that I graduated in 2008, which was really great. And this, maybe this will save this for part two, but I graduated in 2008 with just that feeling of like, oh crap, what do I do now? Like,
Yeah.
literally didn't have a job, didn't even know how to get a job as a classical guitarist. Like, what even is a job? But I was really lucky that I had these brand new pressed CDs in jewel cases that I was incredibly proud of. Even today, I mean, I haven't listened to it in years, but the sound quality was great. I think the playing was really good.
Yeah.
It was a really sort of professional level disc. And so I feel like I hit the ground with that and could kind of run with that, and do think I got a lot of momentum. Sorry, I got a lot of momentum from that. That got some great reviews. I managed to get a bunch of great concerts from that album. So that really was incredible.
Just listening to your story and just listening to the experience that you had with classical guitar teachers, I mean, you had top-notch instruction from three very different but very refined minds in the classical guitar. Ben Verdery is, you're right. It's amazing that he thinks outside, that there's a voice like that in classical guitar when there's being traditional is great, and there's some really wonderful things that come from that, and some wonderful players and some wonderful art, really incredible. Um, but then he almost reminds me of, and I have never met Ben and I've never met Elliot Fisk, but he reminds me of Elliot Fisk in many ways, where there's no, I'm going to go for it, and there's no shame in doing something that I'm not sure is going to work out the way that I want it to work out.
Exactly, yeah. And actually, as a student at Yale, we had Elliot Fisk come in and give master classes a few times, which was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. They're both players who, do have detractors.
Yeah.
They do have people who will, really dislike what they're doing. But to me, that's much more exciting than playing like the really safe option and only doing things that everybody's going to like. And
Right.
even then, you're still going to have people who don't like it. So,
Of course, of course. Well, I'm happy that you said we could try for a round two someday. We'll hear the rest of the story after your million years of guitar education. Let's jump to the lone guitarist questionnaire. Are you ready? I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you can answer them with any depth that you would like. You can give me long-winded stories, or you can just give me a quick 1 or 2 word answer, and then we will link up your current album. We'll promote anything that you want to, and then I'll let you go eat dinner.
cool, sounds great.
Um,
Five's a good number. I can count it on one hand.
exactly. Number one, what is the best gig or performance you've ever had?
There's been a lot. Probably, I'd say the most memorable two gigs that I had, and I'm literally back to back. They were like 3 days apart. The first one was in Kathmandu, Nepal, and the next one was in Kauai, in Hawaii. And I guess that's sort of the just that ability to travel from, what was it, 8,000 feet to the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the space of a couple of days was just, that really stands out. It's just like feeling really incredibly fortunate to be able to really see so much of the world and see, well, this is all a conversation from pre-COVID times.
Right.
But the experiences of being able to travel around the world have been incredible. And those two places specifically, like Kathmandu is just such a magical place, and Hawaii is such an incredibly different but magical place.
There's something really special about being able to travel with, if you're by yourself with just your guitar, feeling almost like a cowboy in a sense of just or you know some sort of trailblazer, just and going to a place where people want you, right? You're going to a place to perform music or to teach or to collaborate or record, and you're going with a purpose to share something really special close to your heart. Now we're going to flip to the other side of that coin. What is the worst gig or performance you've ever had that you would like to share?
Um, I'm just trying to think. I mean, maybe I'm just completely blocking them out of my mind, but I haven't had that many bad ones. I mean, definitely the older I get, the worst gigs are the ones that just don't pay. No, like the
It's
ones that
exposure, like this podcast.
exactly. Well, in the podcast, this is a whole different category. Like I'm happy to do interviews and stuff, but yeah, when you know the concerts that you're doing them for exposure, like it can often be sold as a really good thing. And I think everybody, especially when you're getting out of school, everybody has to do a certain level. As much as I dislike it, but the older I get and the more experienced I get, the less a concert pays, the worse it is. And people will always tell you there's these benefits, but then you get yourself dressed up and practiced and buff your shoes and all this stuff, and then it ends up just never being good.
Mm,
At least that's my experience, and especially the older I get. And that's, we didn't get onto this, but my wife and I run a concert series, and
that's that
we
subculture.
at Subculture in Manhattan. Obviously on pause right now until the indefinite future. But it's every Sunday morning. We've had just incredible artists come to play. We're working on a really limited budget. We have practically no money, but we always insist on paying everybody. That we can't have people playing for free because we know how crappy it can make you feel.
Mhm.
So that's the long-winded
Yeah.
answer. Yeah.
What's the best advice someone gave you, and if you remember who gave it to you?
You should have given me these in advance. I would have thought about them.
No, no, they're fun. They're fun to get right in the moment because then since
um,
the good stories come out.
This is going to sound very just like very, I guess, sensible, but and we've been speaking so much about sort of education, and it really takes me back to that time of being a student, and I can only imagine what it's like being a student graduating in this climate. Like it's tough for every single musician, but someone who's just graduating, it's got to be incredibly tough.
Yeah.
But a piece of advice that was given to me, like when I was, really worried about this 12 years ago, someone said, just put yourself out there, create good content, and people, you'll find a market for it.
Mm.
And it's never been like it's not that easy. Like don't let anyone tell you it's that easy. But there is something to be said about you can't just sit at home waiting for the phone to ring or the email to come in. You have to be as a classical musician, especially a classical guitarist. You have to be very proactive.
Yeah.
No matter how good you are, no matter how well your graduation recital was. The world doesn't necessarily need more classical guitarists. So yeah, so I mean, if you just sort of put yourself out there and create good content, like I don't particularly need to see people just practicing Lagrimer in their bedroom, but you know, obviously again, can't
Yeah.
say too much because we are all in our bedrooms and that's the best we can do.
Right.
But
Well,
when
I'm
we
in my
can all
basement.
go, okay, well, basement, even a little darker, a little dimmer. But in the coming months, we can all go out and find beautiful parks. It's
Yeah.
in the summer. You find somewhere, sit on a beautiful rock, and whatever. Find something and make a beautiful video and put it up on YouTube. Yeah, things like that. Just create good content, but put it out there.
Yeah. Question number 4, and this question has morphed a little bit. It started off as something a little silly, but now I found a good thing, a good place for this question. What never fails to inspire you?
I should say my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, and legitimately mean that we didn't even get onto this. She's half of my other duo, which is called Boyd Meets Girl.
A play on words.
Exactly. We often get groans at concert when we announce what
Uh,
I'm doing. But she's a phenomenal cellist. She's incredible at playing music of like all styles. She's also incredible at just sight reading and making arrangements, and also being an excellent mother to our son. Um, so yeah, she never fails to inspire me. But then I guess also the people we've mentioned, J.S. Bach and Jimi Hendrix.
Hmm.
You listen to their great stuff, and it's just like how can that have come out of just one person?
Right, right. Last but not least, what is your favorite non-guitar related activity in which to engage?
Uh,
Or one of the favorites. There's we like a lot of weird
well,
things, I think.
I mean, that's like over the years. I feel like they've changed a little bit. I don't want to sound like an old man, but do feel like I'm 38 now and no longer as young as I once was. But over the years, like I've really loved playing chess.
Mm.
I do love literature, although as I was saying before, I barely had a chance to read books especially since my son came along, barely a chance. Um, and I guess maybe I'm just getting nostalgic, but travel, really
Mm.
have to say that.
Well, especially
It,
now when you
yeah,
can't.
I know that's definitely the case. Yeah, and sort of just have loved like even traveling throughout the United States. There's not a single place that I've been that I haven't loved spending 48 hours there. But then sort of the more exotic places, like I once spent a month traveling throughout India.
Mm.
My trips to Kathmandu, Nepal, and Japan's magical place, and obviously, I have formally gone back to Australia about once a year, and typically do a tour there where I hit up, at least 8 cities, and often that's the majority of the continent going there. And so we're supposed to be back there in August or September, but that's being postponed indefinite future.
Right.
But we would say, yeah, definitely travel these days. And then also, reading books like Where's Spot? That's become a big. Where's Spot? And actually, Where's Waldo is fun for both of us.
Oh, that must be a new one. That must be a new phase of Where's Waldo because I'm still on. Listen, Brown Bear is amazing.
Uh, all the Eric Carle, right? Eric
Yeah,
Carle books
yeah.
they're great. No, actually, I am being a little flippant, but I've been loving like probably half your audience is turning off now.
Yeah.
But some books that I love are illustrated by John Clayson.
Okay.
He's got a trilogy about hats.
Okay.
One called is that This Is Not My Hat. This Is Not My Hat is brilliant. And then there's another trilogy called Circle, Square, and Triangle.
Mm.
And just I love graphic design,
Hmm.
and so many of these like the really good kids books just are beautifully laid out with like beautiful text and beautiful
Yeah.
drawings. Yeah, and then also my son loves Daniel Tiger, so we
Yeah.
have that as well.
What other? So I know you have the most recent album, The Guitar, which was released last year, I believe, right? And you have some Bach on there, and you have I love the cover of this. I feel like it's just as well. It's you sitting on a staircase with your guitar, and I feel like just keep it simple. It's beautiful. You have a really nice recording of the. Did you release the E major prelude? Is that
Yes,
right?
the whole suite.
The whole suite. Okay. I remember when you released the video of it last year.
Mm.
It was really well played. And I should mention before we go, the only time I've seen you play live was at Subculture, and you did the Soar Mozart variations on a Smallman.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful guitar, and you very, very well played, I should add.
Oh,
So I'm definitely going to link up the album in the show notes. Do you have anything else that you'd like to promote before we head out?
no, that's it. Just yeah, there are 5 albums in total over the past. Well, since that first one at Yale. So 3 solo albums, then an album with Boy Meets Girl, and my guitar duo, which is called the Australian Guitar Duo.
Hmm.
And they're all up there: Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, wherever you look.
Thank you so very much for taking time out of your night.
My pleasure.
Apologize to your wife, and
We'll do it. No, it's been fun to join you in the basement.
and we will see you in the future, hopefully.
Sounds good.